just a quick heads up before we start the video. I'm traveling this week, so I can't really edit like I normally do. I'll try to do the best that I can with this video, but it's going to be a little bit lower quality, and I'm sorry about that. So, I'm doing my best. Anyway, let's get back to the video. What up, YouTube? Played here, and today I want to talk about old games. Specifically, games from like the PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 era. That's honestly one of my favorite eras of video games, because that was back when developers were starting to get a grasp on creating 3D games and 3D environments, but they were also willing to make content that was just off the wall and crazy. I mean, games that come to mind for me are like Mr. Mosquito, and there's this other one where you're like a samurai. I can't remember the name of it. It's basically where you have to get your body parts back, and it's fucking insane. And like, nothing like that would happen today. They don't make games like they used to. They're not the same. Now I feel like a lot of games are either A, indies, which are really nice, because I feel like a lot of smaller developers don't have the constraints that the bigger ones do on their like employees with time crunch and everything. So when you hear about a small developer making a game, I feel like that's more out of passion than it is, oh, we're just trying to make money off of you. And I feel like nowadays that's where a lot of the good, content is coming from. A lot of these smaller indie developers, or a lot of these companies that, treat their employees fairly and stuff like that. And I feel like, back then on the PS1, PS2, developers were willing to be more explorative with their content. They were willing to take a few risks and see what worked, because the whole 3D landscape hadn't been done before. Or at least if it had, like from PS1 to PS2, for example, it was still a very new concept. I mean, the PlayStation 1 was very, low poly kind of console, and then the PS2 came out and it was like a big, it was a big graphical leap, and then from the PS2 to the PS3 it was a huge graphical leap, and it was just a hell of a time for video games. Now I feel like the jumps between generations aren't nearly as big. You had the jump from PS4 to PS5, and that was great because we got 60 frames per second, we got 4K, and we got ray tracing. But other than that, I mean, I'm talking for like the model textures or the textures themselves, I guess. I didn't really notice much of a difference. For me, like the current generation is more about frame rate and resolution than it is like an actual jump in graphical fidelity, if you will. And I find that really kind of, I guess you would say, anticlimactic, because it's just I feel like we've reached a point where models look so real. I mean, for God's sakes, developers, model the sweat on characters' faces now. And, we've got like ray traced shadows. We're really spoiled when it comes to graphics. And with things like Unreal Engine 5, it's gonna change the entire game of the industry and how games look and stuff. And I don't know. I like that hyper realistic look for some games, but for other games, I just feel like it's not necessary. And I feel like a lot of developers try to go out of their way to make their games look the best or whatever. But my whole thing is, I would rather have a stylized art style, because in 20 years, when games look infinitely better at realism, your title that was going to try and be realistic at the time is going to be obsolete. And so I feel like for games to be timeless, they need to be stylized. Like a game like, let me think. So a game like Okami, which is a very good PS2 game if you've ever played it. It's timeless because the art style is pretty. It's pretty not like console generation specific. You could plop that on any platform and it would look good. Same thing with games like Katamari or like certain puzzle games or anything like simpler. I feel like you could really do well in terms of, not only replayability, but in terms of being, shit. I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought. Anyway, I'll edit that out. But, yeah, I'm just really over how modern games are with day one updates and like, oh, buy this skin for $20 or buy this add-on for $50, even though it was already in the game. It just unlocks the code for it or whatever. And I just think it's really scummy. I mean, I think that games should be finished products. And maybe that's like a old-timey kind of take, but I remember, back in the day when I was playing the PS1, when you got a game, the game that you got on the disc was the game that you played. And nowadays, that's not the case. Nowadays, you'll pick up a game like Cyberpunk, first thing, granted how horrible the development of that game was, but anyway, you'll pick up a game like Cyberpunk, and then the first thing you'll have to install is like a 50 gigabyte update. And sometimes the update files are even bigger than the games themselves. Of course it depends on the game you're playing, but it's just crazy to me how different gaming has gotten in the last 20, 30 years. Back in the day, even as relatively close as like the GameCube and the PS2, I mean, a lot of multiplayer was couch multiplayer. Nowadays, everything is all about matchmaking, lobbies. Oh, I'm in this rank, and and it's just so different. It takes the fun out of it in a lot of ways, because there's something about something like couch co-op that's so fun because you're like sitting next to the person you're playing with. And I feel like nowadays, even though we have online and we're able to communicate with millions of people across the globe who play video games and stuff, and that's amazing, but it doesn't give you that feeling of being in the same room, And I just feel like games are different. Their demographics are different, which that's a good thing, I think. But I think that the way games are made and the way that they're treated in society is different. I mean, you have Call of Duty, which comes out on a yearly cycle, basically. And back when I was a kid on the PS2, we didn't really have games that came out on like a yearly cycle and were like this massive online thing. Unless you were into like MMORPGs like World of Warcraft or something like that, where there were a lot of like expansions and stuff. But back back when I was growing up, that just wasn't a thing. That just wasn't a thing that you did. The only thing that I can think of that would have recycled yearly like that was like sports games, obviously, because that's what sports games do. That's what they've always done. And I don't know, man. The state of gaming has just changed. Like, now you can just go onto the Xbox Live Marketplace or PSN or whatever and just buy a game digitally. Back on the PS2, you had to go to like a brick and mortar store or like order online or something, and it's just so weird to me how like now we have instant access to everything. And I guess, that's kind of a shitty take on my part. Well, I don't know if it's a shitty take, but it's definitely one that like I think a lot of people would find kind of controversial. I wish there was still a physical market, but it seems like the way we're heading in gaming and stuff, that eventually it's going to be all digital. And I don't like that, because I don't like, if you remember my video on, I think it was AC Liberation HD, I think it was. I talked about how these developers essentially give you a key to the game and you have access to the key. You don't have access to the game itself. So think about a future like this, where gaming is all based entirely on digital. You can't buy a physical game anymore. Imagine that you like hop on your PlayStation or your Xbox and you go to play a game, and then one day the developer's like, oh, nope, our licensing expired, we have to take it down. And then all of a sudden you lose a game that you paid for, that you paid $60, $70 for. And that's insane. So that's one reason why I really don't like DRM. I think that it's kind of a shitty practice. And I guess what the aim of this video is just me critiquing modern gaming from a multitude of angles, because I just feel like games are completely different than when I was growing up. Sure, they had anti-piracy measures on the consoles and everything, which I mean, obviously that makes sense because that's their properties and they don't want people messing with those. But like they didn't have the same amount of. I feel like modern video gaming is kind of overbearing. Like the companies want you to do this exact thing this exact way. Another good example is the whole thing with VR chat and how they're taking away mods. And I just feel like nowadays the devs have such a tight grip on their games and their content that it's just fundamentally not what it used to be. And yeah. So honestly, this is just kind of a rant. I couldn't think of much of an idea, so I just decided to rant about old video games. If you like this video, go ahead and hit like, share, subscribe. Yeah, I just wanted to rant about old video games. Anyway, see you guys next time. Bye bye.